Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex from Mutated Percussion. So today we are actually doing a partial restoration of an old Yamaha Vibraphone. Let's get into it. Okay, so a little bit about this set of vibes. It actually came from a school that I used to teach at. I did for like one season. I did the front ensemble there, and the set of vibes is in a pretty rough shape. They actually sent it in to us last year, and basically it needed more work than they were really able to afford. So what they did was actually they waited a year. They sent it back to us again this year, and they're like, "Look, we just need this thing to last one more season." I was like, "All right, I will make it last one more season." So that's pretty much what I did. Let's roll the transition and get into the footage. All right, so here is the vibraphone here. It's got some old rubber wheels on there, some rubber tires. One of which the tube that you would re-air it actually completely broke off. So one of the things we're going to do is actually swap those out. The other issue is that the accidentals and the natural keys bump into each other a lot. So we got to space out the railing, and I'm sure if you notice the high F there is missing. They got this little screw in here trying to put it together. We're going to replace that with the correct saddle. First thing you gotta do, take the bars off. Another thing actually we're gonna do is restring this at some point too. This is actually a multi-day project. So you can see the felt there is coming off. We gotta fix that. There's obviously some extra felt they put on because the old stuff wasn't reaching, so we're gonna glue that back down. See the railing here is cracking a bit. We're going to put some glue and wood filler in there and see if we can fix it. I also noticed that this is missing the wing screws that normally hold it up, but I couldn't really figure out how they had it holding up, and it wasn't budging. So I was like, all right, well, it's working. They just want to last another season, so I'm gonna leave it alone. If it works, it works. across the crack there. Try and get it in there as much as possible so that when we clamp it, it really is able to adhere to itself. Looks like we have another kitty alert on our hands. Alright, now that has passed, you can see we're taking out the resonators here, at least the natural ones. And I got the rail clamped. I just put glue on there on the dampening bar, and I am putting a clamp down on that so that I can really make sure it stays put. Alright, now right here I am creating the spacers, and I'm pretty much just going through all of my stuff to see what I could use to create a spacer for the rails, and I ended up making 2 of them. I put one at the far high end and one at the far low end. The one I'm putting together right now is the one I put in the far high end. And this is another one I put together. I didn't end up using this one. I don't know of any company that creates spacers for the inner tube rails for a Vibraphone, but if you guys do, let me know in the comments. that initial spacer, and here's the other spacer. The two that I ended up actually making and using. First, got to take the spring out and take out the other resonators. Alright, and right here, I'm just taking off the old wheels. Unfortunately, I didn't have a wrench large enough to hold both sides, so I was able to find this, though, this clamping wrench. Right here, I actually bought these little tools to help you mark where you're trying to drill. Basically, it makes little indentations, but it's really hard to get to where I was going to drill and put the screws in at, just because of how little room there was between the two rails in the middle. And you'll notice here that I couldn't help it. I had to put the screws in an angle rather than straight through like I really wanted to. I believe right here is where I start installing the spacers. Of course, I had to put them back into place, which was rather difficult. I thought about drilling holes initially, but I was afraid that I would drill them all the way through, and I didn't want to put a hole through the back end of the railing. And I actually struggled to get them back into place where I initially had them. So right here, I'm trying to secure the top spacer on the high end of the Vibraphone. I'm having to put the screws in manually. I'm trying that first. I do believe I get a couple of them in there okay, but I run into some issues with some of them and end up using a drill. And down here, this is where I had to use the drill. As you can see, what I'm talking about, like, I couldn't get them in straight. The drill just wouldn't fit, and I didn't have a smaller one to use that was gonna fit inside of there. So I tried to drill it in first, and then use a regular screwdriver to try getting more, but the screws didn't want to budge. So it's just what it was. So I realized it was actually a bit too low down. I wanted to make sure that it was pushing the railings far enough apart so that the bars wouldn't be hitting. I do also believe I was trying to bend the right angle L-shaped bracers to bend more for the angle that the railing was going so that they would fit better. As you can see, the paint got pretty scraped up, but I do go back and touch it up. And here's the other side. Again, trying to make it as flush as possible, but it's just clearly not going to happen. Okay, so the vibraphone I'm working on, the wheels that the director provided are actually really nice. The problem is that he did not take into consideration how thick the bolt is that goes in the middle of the mechanism now, but he did not take into consideration that, and so when the ones he ordered are too small. But luckily, I am going to Lowe's right now to get uh, some that will fit properly. So yeah, and then I'll resume working on it tomorrow. All right, so day 2. This is where I noticed that the, I don't know what they're called, the metal parts that the wheel goes in between are actually a bit too wide for the wheels that were provided. So I had to make some spacers for them. This way the wheel won't move back and forth and it'll stay in place as the vibes are moving. Of course, I didn't realize at the time was that only one of them was like was really way too wide actually, and the rest were only just like a little bit too wide. So I had to create some washers and kind of stack them a little bit and get creative with it just so that the wheels would fit correctly. And since I had some old casters that I took apart a while ago, I had the tubing from the axle from the inside of them. So I decided to use those to create spacers. So what I'm doing right here is I'm actually measuring out the distance I need for those spacers. So I tried to use the bandsaw here to cut them, only to realize they're a bit too thick. So back to the bench, load up on the vise, and so I had to manually cut each of these. It's always a good idea to sand off the outer edges of these things, just because there's always little metal bits that just kind of stick on there and are hanging on there. And plus, they're usually pretty sharp, so it's just a good idea to try and round out the edges as best as possible. Alright, so right here I'm trying to seal up the crack and holes area a little bit more before I put the correct saddles in there. This is where that screw was earlier. Of course, as I'm doing this, the rail starts to split again. So I have to go back and glue it back down, but I leave the saddles in there. Of course, clamp it back down. I'm going to use a bit of a heavier duty clamp. And that brings us to day 3. Now here, mostly putting it back together. I'm trying to put the plate back in, only to notice that the spacers that I put in are actually stretching apart a bit too much, but luckily I have a fix for that. What I ended up doing was taking a clamp and squeezing them together so that I could get that plate back in there that holds the spring. And it held on there really tight, so it wasn't going to pop off. Day 4. Okay, so between 3 and 4, as you noticed, that high F was missing, and I was debating about what to do because I thought everything was good. Unfortunately, the spacers I put in between the railing actually are a bit too high, so I have to remove them and lower them a little bit, like lower them to, like towards the ground, because they're running into the damper bar, which is not something I wanted to do, but it happens. As you can see right here, I am just moving it to the lower side of those rails and clamping them down a bit so that the bracers will bend out more and form closer to the railing. So what we ultimately decided to do was that in order to get the instrument back to them as quickly as possible, we decided to just have them send the vibe back in once the bar arrived, and I would just put it on there for them at no additional cost, just because it was actually out of stock at the time. So I really wasn't sure how long it was going to take to get in, so I just figured this would just be easiest. That way they have the instrument, and he honestly wasn't really that worried about the missing bar up top. Anyway, so yeah. Alright, now here it's always a good idea when you make mistake holes, go back and fill them up. Putting some Gorilla wood filler in here, it's probably the best stuff I've used. Just trying to make sure, you know, it's presentable and everything for the customer. Just trying to make sure I go through and fill up any holes that I might have made or that just might be there. it's also a very good idea to have a good phone stand so that it doesn't just go down on you like that. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm painting over where I just sealed everything up, just so that it looks nice. It's not the exact kind of paint that was originally on there, but this way it looks better than if it did had I not done it, just because the paint is coming off anyways, and I figured I would just kind of touch it up in a lot of spots, just because it is an old keyboard. This is a matte black paint that I'm using. I really should have used something a little more glossy, but it's just what I had on hand. Alright, so right here I'm putting the bars back in place, just so you guys get a good view of me restringing the keyboard. Now, what's interesting is that, and it's kind of nice that the director provided the keyboard string, so I made sure to use that. It was actual Yamaha vibe string, apparently, and one of the things on there I thought was very interesting was that on one end it had like this metal wire, kind of like what you would come across for like a paper clip in there, and it was twisted at the bottom at the end, so it ran just like a needle really through there, and it made stringing the keyboard a lot easier. Normally, I know what I use, and a lot of people use, we just use about an 1/8 inch thick parachute cord, and that holds pretty strong and everything too, so it's really nice and it's easy to get. You can usually get it from any given hardware store. You don't have to wait and try to order it and everything like you would this stuff. But I'm now considering trying, next time I have to restring a keyboard, getting a paper clip and running it through the bottom, or basically the spot where I'm going to be threading it, and seeing if that works, because this was really quite nice. Generally, when you're restringing a keyboard, what can happen is that the tips of the string can get caught inside of the bars, and then they fray, and it just makes it really hard to get it through the bar. It'll get stuck in there and everything and jammed up, and it's always a pain just to try and get it. Usually I end up cutting it and everything and doing it. And what I'm doing here is actually what you always want to do. You want to lift up the end bars, come over and tie the knot. And tie a knot, basically, if you have these kinds of springs that where the knot goes inside, and you're going to then hook it together, and then just cut off the excess, and then take a lighter and burn the tips. That way they don't fray and get all messy and everything. And then clamp them down so that if you have to, do anything with the keyboard later on, like I have to with this one, which is put that other bar on, you're able to easily thread the string back through. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me today. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. Also, make sure to check out the merch store. Be sure to pick something up there, or else go to Weechi here. Oh, stop. Go to Weechi here. We'll use her flash step. And she's gone. And sneak her way in and Shunko your furniture. I'll see you guys next week.